On this week's NFV SDN Reality Check, we'll talk with F5 about the shifting service orchestration landscape and Ubiquiti on its view of the virtualization space. Thanks for joining us on this week's NFV SDN Reality Check. I'm your host, Dan Meyer, Editor-in-Chief of RCR Wireless News. Well, one of the topics I want to touch on today is service orchestration. Obviously, when it comes to NFV and SDN in terms of the telecom space, service orchestration has shown to be a pretty big topic in terms of how operators are going to start rolling out their services. Obviously, operators have their services already deployed right now, network services already working, and as they bring on virtualization, they're going to look to service orchestration to kind of tie these legacy and new pieces together. Joining us today is Frank Yu, who is the Senior Technical Marketing Manager at F5, to garner more insight into the importance and challenges facing NFV service orchestration for telecom operators. Hey, Frank, thanks for joining us today. We appreciate it.
Thank you very much, Dan. Glad to be here.
Great. Well, I guess obviously now the service orchestration aspect of NFV and SDN, it's a big part of, like I said earlier, a big part of the telecom industry. I guess, as you guys look at this part of the deployment of NFV and SDN, what's F5's view on the importance of service orchestration for telecoms in this move towards virtualization?
That's a very good question, Dan. Service orchestration is critical for NFV because when we start talking about NFV, initially we were talking about cost savings, CapEx and OpEx savings. But then as we started delving into what NFV really does, we started saying, no, really the primary benefit of NFV is to really provide the elasticity and agility for your service networks, the ability to create on-demand scaling and the ability to add and remove services very efficiently. And to properly achieve this agility and elasticity, you have to have proper orchestration and management of these systems to make them work together.
Interesting. You brought up a couple good topics. Obviously, the cost part of this and the business model on NFV and SDN deployments is still a bit, it seems like, in flux. And so, like you said, that's maybe perhaps shouldn't be the main focus, at least initially. But this elasticity of it, does seem to be kind of key. And obviously, with orchestration, that's going to be a big part of this because operators need to be able to integrate these new services into their legacy operations and their OSS, BSS platforms and make sure that it all kind of ties together. So it does seem like that the service orchestration part of this is going to be a big focus for the operators. I don't know if the people I've talked to, it's definitely a big part of this. I know some analysts have mentioned that it could be a potential choke point at some point because, again, if these orchestration platforms aren't in place, it could really hinder what operators can do when it comes to rolling out their virtualization movement, so the virtualization operations. So I guess as we look at this space, Frank, I guess, what challenges do you see in terms of bringing these service orchestration platforms to the telecom market?
So this is interesting. The primary challenge that I see, at least the initial challenge that I see in terms of bringing these orchestration models to market, is that even though NFV has been defined, even though we have working groups, we do not have any standards today on what these interfaces are for the connectivity and for the orchestration models to work together. So if there are no standards, how can we develop NFV solutions today? We can't be NFV certified, we can't be NFV ready or NFV compliant today if we don't have standards. They are being worked on by individual groups. We're trying to get them together, but it's really a mishmash of trying to get these technologies together and get some sort of consensus on where they're going. That's definitely one of the first challenges.
Yeah. Go ahead. No, go ahead. I'm sorry.
I was going to say the second challenge is really now we have these legacy networks with this proprietary hardware in place today. And NFV is not going to replace the entire network for the foreseeable future, maybe not even forever. It's going to be a hybrid network model of proprietary hardware because of function, performance, other requirements, and this virtualized solution that we're talking about with NFV. These orchestration models need to be able to work these two components together, even though they have the same function, they are different in terms of capability and hardware. The orchestration model needs to see them as a unified platform, be able to integrate them seamlessly.
Good points. Good points. Obviously, you mentioned that standards issue. That's a huge part. I mean, I know Etsy's working pretty aggressively on trying to get the standards together. I know the industry, it seems like there's lots of new working groups that have popped up, Open Daylight, OPNFV, all these different ones that have popped up to try to target this. Does it seem like, from your point of view, that the market or that the vendors and the community itself are working well enough together to, I guess, tackle that standards aspect of this, or is that going to be something that's going to hinder this for maybe some time?
It's working well today for the most part, and mostly because we have this multi-vendor relationships in these different organizations. There are several communities out there that are working together in a multi-vendor environment. F5 obviously is working with quite a few of them, and we're trying to work with as many as possible, but they do have different nuances to the way they do put things together. So that is going to be a challenge moving forward. And how do we get those standards established? It's going to take time. Is it going to become a de facto standard where one kind of dominates the marketplace? Or is it going to be a standard that's going to be really developed through these working groups and these standards bodies and organizations, TM Forum, IETF, et cetera, 3GPP? We're not sure. But ultimately, somewhere down the road, those standards do need to converge. So
Yeah.
what we have today is a solution where we can get things out of the box to actually show some proof of concepts and abilities, but ultimately we are going to have to migrate to some sort of consistency.
Interesting, interesting. I guess on the timing of this, I mean, you kind of brought up the fact that, for some time and maybe forever, operators are going to have to kind of operate these kind of dual networks where it's going to be the new virtualized networks, but also their legacy core networks, whether it's the base stations and parts like that. I mean, I guess, do you see any sort of timing challenge on this? Because it does seem like that the operators are pushing pretty aggressively to start rolling out virtualization. I mean, I know AT&T has given some timeframes of what they want to do. Verizon's come out more recently with what their plans for virtualization are too. Does it seem like, I guess, the timing aspect of getting the vendor community, the ecosystem in place, is that, you think, going to meet these I guess, timelines that the operators are looking for in deploying these virtualized platforms with service orchestration?
I think it's going to take some time. Obviously, what we're doing today is we're looking at individual POCs where we're trying to find specific use cases that we can implement an NFV type architecture that we can just prove that there's value to this NFV architecture. And these use cases are very focused and they're very limited in terms of their capability and their impact and footprint on the core network. As we move forward, we're going to expand those use cases to broaden the reach into the core network so that eventually a lot of the core network will be virtualized. So we will have virtualized EPC plus virtualized IMS plus virtualized RAN, radio access, et cetera. But let's stay focused today, let's stay limited, so there is a very limited impact and potential overlap with what you have to do with the legacy infrastructure. We're trying to play it as a fairly new, out of the sandbox, greenfield opportunity today with the POCs, and then move forward and see how we can bleed that into the other parts of the network.
Got it. Okay. Does it seem like, from your point of view, I mean, obviously you mentioned the work that's going on with the different vendors and these different ecosystems, different communities. Does it seem like, in general, that the ecosystem and the vendors are working relatively well together on this process? Because it is going to take everybody working together on this, because operators do look for a multi-vendor type of ecosystem out there. Does it seem like, from F5's point of view, that everybody's being very cooperative in terms of working together on this process?
This is one thing that's been really positive about NFV. NFV is such a large paradigm shift in terms of the concept of building your network architectures. And there's so much potential with this cloud-like technologies of agility and elasticity for NFV to bring to market in terms of these core networks and their designs, that a lot of the competitive aspects of a lot of these vendors have started to break down. So where the vendors have been competitive in the past, now they're willing to work together. So F5 is working on quite a few POCs where there are multiple vendors in the play, major system integrators, where in the past they were competitive. Now we're starting to work together. Yes, maybe a little bit of a challenge, but it is definitely coming together where we are starting to be a lot more cohesive and consistent in terms of working together and playing nicely.
That's always good to hear too. I mean, obviously, I know, at least from the people I've spoken to with different vendors on this topic, it seems like at this point it is very much, not so much in the C-level part of it. It's more like in the operations part of it. And it seems like, in general, those people tend to not be super competitive with each other. I mean, it seems like there's definitely a cooperative nature, a cooperative feeling about this, and that seems at least helping, at least in this initial process. It does seem like the people involved are willing to work and not, aren't looking at the name tags and who you work for so much. Is trying to work on these different solutions. So it seems like what you're saying too, that seems like a big part of this. People are willing to work together, and that's important to really get this process off the ground, it seems.
And that's critical, because definitely when we look at it, NFV, it has to be a multi-vendor environment. There have to be multiple players to provide the different pieces of the infrastructure. When we're talking about the NFVI for the platform, the VNS with different services, the management orchestration, it has to be a multi-vendor environment, and the vendors have to work together and play nicely. And that's where we come back and bring this all back together, where the standards have to be consistent between these different pieces, and the vendors have to be able to work with each other and partner with each other really and truly, because when we go into opportunities with the customers and we're working closely with the customers, we have to be able to come in with a unified message, unified front. We can't come in piecemeal and say we're going to provide this one piece of the NFV architecture and expect everybody else to do it independently. It's not going to work out that way.
Yeah, that's a good point. I was speaking with one of the carriers a little while ago, and they'd mentioned to me that, you know, if a vendor doesn't come to them with a complete package of this, or at least plans for a complete package when it comes to virtualization, they're not going to get very far in the door there. I mean, it seems like the operators really want someone who has a plan in place, not just, hey, I can do this little part here, or I do this little part here. You know, you have to have the partners involved, and if you bring all that to the table, that seems to help the process along, and at least get the vendors a little bit farther into the door, at least when it comes to working with these telecom operators.
Absolutely. And again, that's why it's important for us to create these relationships, have these communities today where we have and the communities are somewhat isolated. So we have pockets of these different communities with these different vendors working together. But you're starting to see a lot of functionality bleed and vendor bleed across these communities as well. I think F5 is a good example where we don't provide a lot of the core components necessary for the NFV infrastructure, but we provide a lot of functionality. So we're willing to work with, we want to work with as many communities as possible. So we're going to continue to see that cross bleeding. And again, once these standards and once NFV really starts to mature, you're going to see everybody, I think, pretty much in a common ecosystem.
Yeah, makes sense. Makes sense. And obviously, from the people I've talked to again on this topic, it seems like 2015 is going to be a big year for all of this. I know we're still kind of in the POC stages right now, but it seems like there's some people out there claiming that maybe by the end of the year, even we'll see some maybe even commercial deployments at a limited scale. So it seems like it's going to be a very, very busy next 6 to 8 months for I'm sure F5 and all the companies out there. So I'm sure it'll be good times for you guys and keeping you guys busy, I'm sure. So, well, hey, Frank, we definitely appreciate the insight today on the topic. Obviously, something we're going to cover here quite a bit going forward, but we definitely appreciate your time today on talking about the NFV. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much, Dan. I appreciate it.
Great. All right. Well, stay on the NFV SDN topic. I might want to, at this point, maybe do a quick plug. I know, as I mentioned, I was talking to Frank there. We do have a new report coming out on service orchestration here in the next few days. Should be out, I think, on Wednesday. And also, we're going to have a webinar next week, too, on Wednesday. So please feel free to check it out. You can check it out on our website to register for that webinar looking at service orchestration. Well, again, one of the things about NFV that we've noticed recently is that some of the vendors are focusing on specific markets when they're working with the carrier partners to deploy NFV, or at least initial POCs of NFV. One of those markets has been the enterprise market, as well as you know, some of the higher stakes markets involved with telecom operators. I recently spoke with Nabel Suli, who's the CEO at UbiCube, about that topic, as well as some of the challenges he sees in the business models when it comes to rolling out NFV. First, I asked Nabel why the enterprise market has been the main focus for vendors. Let's take a look at that enterprise clip here first.
I think 90% of them is targeting that market. Absolutely, you're absolutely right. That's where it's going to start. Yeah. Definitely. Yeah. Because again, I think pragmatically, NFV is not the thrust for NFV to happen, or let's call it generically, let's put it virtualization to happen in the networking environment. I think the thrust is not an architectural play. Mm-hmm. It is true when you read the press, when you read the hype, you feel that, new architectural paradigm. That's what's, like people wake up in the morning sitting in a temple and say, today we're going to change the architecture. Why? Well, what's the drive for that? I think the thrust is fundamentally the appetite that those telcos have to provide more services, more value-added services, I should say, at a more cost-effective price point to the enterprise market, which is, bear in mind, the market, I believe, that has the money right now, because most of those telcos have saturated penetration in consumer. I mean, for Christ's sake, how much more can you take out of the average Joe in terms of monthly fee for TV channels, right? That's it. So the El Dorado is enterprise. You're absolutely right. I don't think it's an architectural play. I think it's cost optimization, but expanded services play. And one of the services suite that those guys are looking at adding is clearly the security suite, because there's a reason why Orange has in this particular offering has a firewalling capability, right? Because security is appealing to the enterprise market. It speaks volumes. They understand that. They know it's important, and they know they cannot manage it. So they're ready to entrust a third party to do it for them. Granted, that third party has the credibility and so on and so forth. And the big names like Orange, we also announced recently NTT. I mean, those kind of big names would have the credibility to provide those kind of services. So yes, I'm with you.
Sully also provided some insight into the challenges facing telecom operators when it comes to making a business case for the deployment of virtualization. Let's take a look at the business model clip next, please.
Point. I mean, there's a difference, even inside a telco, there's a difference between selling to your top management a project on the basis of it impacting your cost structure. If you want to sell on the basis of, I have something that disruptive cost-wise in terms of what it's going to cost us to provide service, well, first of all, let's be real here. I mean, those guys have huge workforce. So anything you claim is going to be disruptive, nothing is disruptive in the telecom world, because those guys are not going to fire 10,000 people just because, virtualization kicked in. So anybody selling on this basis, I mean, he's, in my opinion, smoking pipe, because it doesn't make any sense, right? The inertia is so big that those guys will take forever. The things that we see, the projects that stick and that really happen short term are the ones where internally the sale is made on the fact that, hey, if we had this, we could be selling more services, we could be broadening our service portfolio short term, right now. That's the one that's going to get momentum, I think. And that's the one that's going to basically, those are the type of projects that are going to basically break the ice and pave the way for, indeed, the future architectural revamp that will ultimately happen. But it has to start somewhere. And you're absolutely right. I mean, back to the enterprise space, clearly take the case of Orange. If you look at the edge of the network and you look at all those services they can provide, and you look at it with, and your mindset is, hey, I want to be the killer app or the killer service provider, in the sense that I want to be the one that provides the best customer experience. Well, if you put that focus on, and if the technologies we're looking at right now helps that telco provide a better customer experience, then that's a winning use case. That's a use case that will stick, and that's the use case that will get budget, and that's the use case that they will spend money on, and they will put their, and guess what? That's actually a use case that's not going to be disruptive from an HR point of view. Very, very little so, because it's not sold on cost reduction. That's not the driver. Ultimately, there will be cost reduction, but it's not the main driver. The other last point I'd like to make on the cost reduction piece, there are two ways to look at it. Either you look at it from a vendor selling, slideware and a vision, and hey, virtualization cost reduction. Beautiful. You're going to cut your workforce by 50%. Okay. Because my technology is so, well, that's one way to view things, but I don't think those large telcos will start running just because of that pitch. On the other hand, if structurally you change the name of the game in that industry is a technology-driven industry, right? So the service providers consume technology that they put together, they assemble that technology, and then they sell it like a service to an enterprise community. So they have two cost components. There's the technology cost component, and there's their HR cost component. Any vendor who's pitching on, you're going to reduce your HR and your OpEx, everybody says yes. Nobody does anything. But if, on the other hand, you're selling on, hey, but guess what? Your vendor cost portion of your cost structure will dramatically drop. Why is that? Well, because you're going to keep everybody honest. Because here's the beauty about NFV. NFV, like the case of Orange where they have virtual CP, enables them to slice and dice and pick and choose for every function, the best of breed and the best price, and then stitch them together. If they can do that, if they reach that level of flexibility and freedom in assembling technology, well, then ultimately what's going to happen, they will have a bigger bargaining power, and certain price points that are commanded by certain vendors will be dropped. So ultimately, they will experience price reduction, but it's not the one we're thinking of.
From on the interview with Nabil Sully from UbiCube, please check out the RCR TV site. We discussed more about UbiCube's recent work on NFV with operator Orange in France, also on how telecom operators are reacting differently to NFV and SDN deployments, and also the interoperability challenges facing the industry that were also brought up earlier by Frank Yu from the F5. I definitely recommend you check out the interview. It's a really good interview, some great insights, maybe some controversial topics there from the bill also on the topic, but definitely check it out on the RCR TV site. Well, that'll do it for this week's NFV SDN Reality Check. Again, I want to thank my guests for today, Frank Yu from F5 and Nabil Sully from UBCube. And again, we'll see you again here next week.
Telecom Careers, the #1 global telecom and wireless job board, telecomcareers.com. NFV SDN Reality Check with Dan Meyer is a production of RCR TV. To suggest show topics or to reach Dan, you can find him on email, dmeyer@rcrwireless.com, and on Twitter @Meyer_Dan. For more Dan, news on NFV SDN and everything wireless, find your way over to rcrwireless.com.